Well, hello, everybody. I'm checking right now to see if I'm live, and I guess I am. It takes a minute to see, and I hope I'm gonna be able to sit out here and these mosquitoes aren't gonna be eating me alive. They've already been biting me. But anyway, how have y'all been? It's been a long week so far, but I hope everybody's been having a good healthy week. I've been working. Anyway, I've got a message for y'all, and I know that I picked up last time was when 1 Samuel 23, we're in 1 Samuel 24, and it really fits in perfectly with this week and where we're at in this week. I was sitting here studying and I was thinking about it because the Lord talks to me during the week, and when I decide to do a message, it's really amazing sometimes how the messages line up. And I hope I'm gonna get through this message. My computer was unplugged. I didn't realize it was until I right was fixing to do the message. So it's low on battery. So let's hope it lasts. If it cuts off, I'll just come back. Hopefully it's not sitting here. Hopefully it's going to be smooth and not um, having a problem as mosquitoes is biting me like crazy right now. So anyway, earlier this week, I first did some work for Apostle, and she had texted me that night and said, she thanked me said thank you for showing us some grace, and that word from her has set the tone for this week. And it has my mind has been on that concept a lot this week, on grace. I had another conversation with someone that contacted me about that, because we had this problem right now in Bible with this negative attitude, and those of us who are trying to have a positive attitude, those of us who are trying to actually lift people up out of this stronghold of despair that they're in, and trying to push for things like justice and restoration, and growth. We get bogged down by the negativity sometimes, and we lose our footing a little bit. But that's why it's good when we can reach out and encourage each other. Help each other get back on track. So sometimes when you're helping somebody else, they actually help you, because you listen to your own self. And so that's a little bit of what happened. So this chapter, 1 Samuel 24, is takes place in this caves in this place called En Gedi. Um, this is like a wilderness test in the life of David, um, and it really defined his character in how he dealt with um, this situation that happened with he was in this position that his Saul, David was going to be king one way or another, and but at this point he's being pursued by Saul, and Saul is king, and Saul has pursued him all across everything, and he's put him through a lot. And there comes this moment where David and his men are hiding in this cave, and Saul happens to wander into this cave that is filled with David and his men. And at this point, the men are like, "This is your chance." He he's in this he's here, and they're hiding in the cave. Saul doesn't know they're in the cave, that these men that they're in this cave at this point. And he comes into the cave, and of course it's probably dark in the cave, can't see, and and so the men are, like to David, "This is your chance. God's delivered him into your hand. You need to take a chance and kill him." And David uh, raises up, sleeps out with his sword, and he actually cuts off part of Saul's robe. And Saul doesn't know this has happened. As I said, there's a cave and it's dark, and he doesn't, I guess, not realizing exactly, not immediately what that anything's happened, because his robe's been torn off, slashed off with sword. Hold on just a second. I gotta put the dogs up. Hey. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. He barks, and I know y'all can't hear anything when he's barking. So, I'm gonna move my bench at some point eventually, so I'll be further away from the dogs when I'm barking. You won't hear them bark. Anyway, so David slashes his robe. Saul leaves out of the cave, and this is at this point. It says that um, of course, David and his men are hiding in like the back of the cave, the remotest part of the cave. And then Saul comes in, David reaches out, slashes the robe off. Saul leaves out of the cave. And then at this point, David becomes convicted in a way. David feels bad that he's even done that, because he has rose his hand up against the Lord's anointed. He says, and it says his heart was struck that he even did went to that that length. And so David then goes out of the cave and calls to Saul, and Saul turns to see that it is David, and David is bows down to Saul, and pretty much he has the robe in his hand, and he tells him, he gives a speech about how, um, I could have killed you, but I didn't, you know, um, and that I have you've pursued me, you've done this is what you've done to me, this is the type, but this is who I am. That I could have killed you, but I didn't. And he has the robe as proof to show Saul, how close he came to death. And at this point, Saul realizes the grace that David had just showed him. And it turned Saul's heart. And in verse 17 is Saul says to David, "Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil." So, the themes in this chapter are that, you know, for one thing, David chose to rely on God's timing. He knew that, he would be king in time, and that he couldn't force God. He wasn't going to force God's hand to do something that, try to hasten that in some way, or do something by attacking Saul, killing Saul. He trusted the Lord, and trusted that the Lord would deliver him in his own time from out of the hand of Saul. And so he resisted that temptation to try to force the Lord's hand through violence, and chose to allow the Lord to do what he knew he would do. And it shows that even though Saul was not very righteous, and that he was pursuing, and the things that he was doing, he had done, and he was doing to David, but he was still the Lord's anointed, and David had respect for that. He knew that God had put Saul in the position that he was in, and that if God put him there, then he should respect that. And so that's how David distinguished between Saul's character, which was, he had poor character, but his office was that he was instituted in this position by God. So he respected that position that God put him in because he respected God. And it also highlights the theme of true character is something that is revealed by what one does in the dark. Especially when you have power, and you can caught. David was in the cave. He knew he just killed Saul. Nobody would ever know it was him that even did it. Nobody could see. David still chose that a different path. So, because he knew that even though no man would see, he knew God would see. So um this chapter connects to the gospel narrative in that it serves as a type or shadow pointing toward the character of Jesus Christ. While David spared his enemy out of sense of duty, Jesus spared his enemies, us sinners, uh, while we were still sinners. Um, we didn't deserve it, but um, he did it anyway. And just as David refused to seize the kingdom by force, Jesus refused the shortcuts offered by Satan in the wilderness, and Jesus achieved his kingdom not by taking a life, but by giving his own. And um, at the end of this chapter, David tells Saul, let the Lord judge between me and thee, saying this part of the speech that he made. So this is, you know, um, the Lord will judge which one of us is right and which one of us is wrong. And um, David was choosing to say that he was not going to hate Saul. He was not going to hold a grudge against Saul. He was not going to. It was the Lord. It was the Lord that would do the judgment. The Lord would decide if anybody deserved any type of retribution or anything. This is echoed by Peter's description of Jesus, where he said, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. That's 1 Peter 2:23. So, in this chapter, our application for spiritual growth is David was conscience-stricken over a piece of cloth. Spiritual growth is marked by an increasing sensitivity to sin. Things that once seemed justified become weight to our spirits, that our spirits refuse to carry. And we have to wait on God's timing. The cave is a classroom for patience. An open door is not always a gift from God. If it requires compromising our ethics, it is a test. Growth means trusting God's calendar over our own. And it teaches us mercy as a witness. David's mercy broke Saul's heart, causing him to acknowledge David's righteousness. Responding to hostility with grace remains the most powerful tool for internal growth and external witness. Now I want to go into how this um, actually is the perfect verse uh, for this week because of what today is, and how this relates to how David in this cave relates to Jesus in Gethsemane. Both of them occurred in the darkness. One, the cave in En-Gedi, and then the garden in Gethsemane. And both involved a choice between the way of the sword and the way of spirit. Today is what we call Maundy Thursday. And it was the day we remember when Jesus was in Gethsemane. And at that time, just like David's me and Peter believed that this divine moment, this opportunity had arrived, that they would be able to strike down the enemy. They came to arrest Jesus, and Peter drew out his sword and he cut off the ear of this soldier Malchus. And he acted on that same impulse that these men had felt in that cave, that thought that God was God. This was God's doing, that God had delivered them to them. That they were going to have to fight, and that they were going to be able to overcome the enemy at that point. But Jesus' reaction highlights this deep level of grace. And just how David cut that robe, but spared, Saul, because he was motivated though by this legal righteousness. But Jesus went even further because he didn't just stop at the Peter cut his ear off. He didn't just stop there. He actually actively healed the man. And by restoring Malchus' ear, Jesus demonstrated that the kingdom of God is not advanced by wounding others, but by taking the wounds upon oneself. As I said, we're in Holy Week, and we're moving up to this weekend, which is the ultimate example of grace, an act of grace that happened. The cross and this teaches us about restraint of power. On Good Friday, Jesus stood before the Sauls of his day. And like David, Jesus had the divine right to strike back. And he could have called down 12 legions of angels. Instead, he allowed his robe, which was his life, to be torn so he wouldn't have to be. Or so we wouldn't have to be. And just like David waited for God to vindicate him, that's when he told Saul, "You shall let the Lord judge between me and thee." Similarly, Jesus entrusted his spirit to the Father and went into the cave of the tomb and waited. And while David's vindication was an earthly throne, Jesus' vindication was the resurrection, defeating death itself. And so, as I said, this core connection is grace in both in this story, in this chapter, and in what this week represents. Because while grace is often defined as unmerited favor, these narratives reveal it more specifically as power restrained by love. This is vividly illustrated by comparing David's restraint at En Gedi with Jesus' journey through Holy Week, where David faced the temptation to kill the king who was hurting him. Jesus faced the temptation to destroy those who were actively crucifying him. And despite the impulses to seize the moment, David's men claiming God's hand and the crowds mocking Jesus to save himself, both chose mercy. David's act of grace resulted in a temporary peace, and Jesus' act of grace, healing his enemy and dying for the world, achieved eternal reconciliation. So as you reflect on this week, this application should become personal. We have to ask, who in our life is acting as a Saul? This maturity is moving past merely not hurting them like David, but to actively seeking their healing like Jesus. And we need to reflect on the fact that grace often looks like waiting. Just as David stayed his hand and Jesus stayed his tongue, we grow when we stop managing our own justice and let God be the judge. This weekend, we move from the cave of the tomb to the light of the resurrection. And it reminds us that the grace David whispered in the dark is the same grace that shouted from the empty grave. You are spared, you are healed, and you are loved. How does the image of Jesus healing his enemy right before his own arrest change the way you view the Sauls in your own life this week? As I said, this week had me thinking a lot about grace and how sometimes all of us can lose a little bit of sight of that and get caught up in emotion, and then we forget we all need it. I love y'all. I'll see y'all next time.